Welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast, episode 223. This time on the podcast, Jen interviews Andie, Kramer, and Al Harris on breaking down gender stereotypes in the workplace. Because urinals in the women's restroom is just plain wrong.
You're listening to the Careers by Jen podcast with me, Jen Swanson, the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I've got an important conversation with guests Andie, Kramer, and Al Harris. They happen to be married to each other. They are both lawyers. They are workshop leaders and speakers, and they are authors of a couple of books, but the one that caught my attention was Breaking Through the Bias, Communication Techniques for Women to Succeed at Work. Now, this conversation is not strictly for women. There's information for men in our conversation as well, and I begin by asking them, what is the number one gender stereotype that you encounter in your work? And we'll get to their answer right after this.
Are you procrastinating? Do you want to start a job search but aren't quite sure where to begin? Is it all just a little overwhelming? At Careers by Jen, we have a 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge to help you get unstuck and move toward finding your dream job. Every day for 5 days, you'll receive an email to your inbox that asks you to complete one task. Every task you complete moves you closer toward your goal. The best part about this challenge is that it's absolutely free. Come over to careersbyjen.com and you'll see the 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on the image of Jen, sign up with your email address, and you'll be 5 days closer to reaching your goal. Why wait when you can get busy? Visit careersbyjen.com after this podcast.
So Andie and Al, welcome to the show, and I want to start off by asking you, what is the number one gender stereotype that you have encountered in your work?
Well, for me, the biggest stereotype has been that women are assumed to be, expected to be, and punished if we're not viewed as nice and kind and sweet, which creates a tension between competence and confidence. And so when I've projected confidence and competence, then people who don't know me think that I might be a very nasty person.
Interesting. And what about you, Al?
I think that for me, you're going to have to excuse me. I'm a little hoarse today.
No worries.
For me, the biggest stereotype is that the opposite of Andie's, not the opposite, but the gender opposite. That is that men are expected to be, assumed to be, and punished if they are not agentic, that is strong and forceful, unemotional, that they are able to get the job done without too much concern for people's feelings or the circumstances surrounding the issue. That is, that men are assumed to be basically insensitive. And the biggest gender stereotype that I'm aware of is that it is very stifling for men to live in an environment in which they are forced and expected to be unemotional, unresponsive, unconcerned about their feelings or other people's feelings.
You know, this still astounds me that it's 2019 and this sounds like 1950.
It does, unfortunately.
Well,
it just hasn't changed.
My goodness. So not a lot of progress. Are you noticing any progress anywhere?
Absolutely. There is progress. The problem is that since the 70s through the 1970s through the mid 1990s, there were dramatic changes. But since the 1990s, the studies all show that it's fairly tapered off. And although we do have more women in business, we do have more women in senior leadership positions, the stereotypes and the biases are developed by the time we're 3 or 4 years old. And so they're very hard to break habits. And so if we have them through our lives, we bring them into the workplace with us.
One of the things that I think is telling in this regard, Andie and I are both lawyers. And here in the United States, where we are, women and men are now graduating from law school in approximately equal numbers, so that women are entering the profession of law in basically the same numbers that men are. But if we look up to the most senior partners, which we call equity partners here, that number is right around 18-19%, which is the same thing it was in 1995. So that between 1995 and now, we have made no progress with respect to women assuming the leadership roles in our legal organizations in the United States.
Maybe there's been a percentage here or there that's improved, but it's not commensurate with the numbers of women that have joined into the professional workforces.
And so what kind of pressures have you noticed on workers when they're facing this kind of, lack of progress?
Well, it can be very discouraging. And so what happens is for a lot of women who are competent, confident, talented, what happens is they get discouraged. And the women drop out at each of the levels as they would be working their way up the career ladder, primarily because of the effort that's involved and the sense that they're not being treated fairly. And so that's a big reason why we don't see as many women at senior levels, because they are pushed out of their careers.
One of the other consequences of this pressure that women are under is that it makes it very difficult for women to establish positive, mutually supportive relationships with other women. Women find themselves looking around and seeing that there are limited number of women's seats at the leadership table. And therefore, they are often forced into competition with other women. And that same gender competition makes it very difficult for women to be allies at work, so that we see many, many conflicts among women precisely because they are working in environments that are biased against women leaders.
It must be exhausting.
It is, except that there's also, we've written 2 books. One, Breaking Through Bias, Communication Techniques for Women to Succeed at Work. We provide conversations that women have with themselves, what we can say, what we can do about resilience and trying to develop a coping sense of humor, and things that can help us dust ourselves off and keep going. Our second book is It's Not You, It's the Workplace, Women's Conflict at Work and the Bias That Built It. And in that book, we do look at the issues about how women can do a better job of supporting each other in developing the workplace sisterhoods that we really want to have and to be part of.
Now, I have so many questions. You said a while ago that the gender bias is solidified at age 3 or 4. Can you talk about that before we get into what you just said?
Yes. Stereotypes we learn them as small children, and from the minute we're born, we're bombarded with stereotypes. When a child is born, very often the first question that people ask the new dad is it a boy or a girl? They don't say, hey, how's the mom doing? Right. It's mostly just, is it a boy or a girl? If it's a boy, they flip him up in the air and they talk to him tough. And if it's a girl, they coo to her. And so by the time we're 3 or 4, we've got that fairly figured out. And the big three sorts of stereotypes that are fairly hardwired habits by 3 or 4 are I'm a girl and he's a boy, I'm young and you're old, and your skin is a different color from mine. And so those are stereotypes that develop by 3, 4, 5 years old.
And I wonder if there's any movement or change in that because of, gender fluidity and all that, the stuff that is becoming more in the social conscious, at least in our corner of the world. I'm not sure if that's true everywhere.
Well, we certainly hope so. The problem is that we haven't been able to accumulate any data that indicates that it's making a big difference when women get into the workplace. Certainly, the gender fluidity, the growing acceptance of non-binary gender categories, the recognition that women need to be given the same opportunities in sports, in academics that boys are. All of these things we would hope are going to make a difference. Our problem is that when we get to the workplace and measure career success, the rates of advancement of men and women, whether it's in business or academia or the professions, we're not seeing that progress showing up there. So, like you, I think we are hopeful that change is afoot, but we haven't seen it yet.
And change is so slow, isn't it?
Exactly. And let me sort of underline something that Al said and really tags off of what you said, Jen, which is that one of the key things is that women, it's not our problem, and it's not that we have to change the world ourselves. The reality is that men in organizations need to do better jobs, but it's really 3 trains leaving the station. It's organizations need to do better, men need to do better, but there are things that we as women can do to make sure that we're getting the career that we deserve and loving going into work by following some tips that can allow us to confront or work our way around or navigate through the stereotypes that other people have. We can control ourselves, but we really don't have the power to control other people.
So I want to jump into that. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, I want to ask you about some specific tips for women in particular, and maybe some tips for the men on how to help this change along.
You've updated your resume, you've sent it out, and you've been selected for an interview. Congratulations! And now you want to get ready, really ready. This is where Careers by Jen can help. We have a comprehensive online course called How to Ace a Job Interview When You Haven't Interviewed in a Long Time. This video-based course is jam-packed with information, advice, and exercises to help you get completely prepared to walk into an interview situation with confidence. From exactly what to prepare in advance, to how to answer common questions, to what questions you might ask the interviewer, and so much more, this course is designed to get you ready. Visit careersbyjen.com and click on Training Resources to see the curriculum, preview a couple of the introductory lessons, and see what others who have taken the course are saying about it. Visit careersbyjen.com and get ready to ace your next interview.
So I'm speaking with Andie Kramer and Al Harris, and we are going to jump into asking about how people can help move this change along with some practical tips and tricks.
Well, I'll start with some of the things that women can do. One of the things is that because of the stereotypes and biases that women are supposed to be modest and kind and nice and sweet, if we have something important to say, very often we're going to couch it in a way that makes it so that we don't seem too in your face. And if we do that, we make our opinions, our views seem less valuable. for example, women will say, I'm sorry, in a way that men won't. And so by saying, I'm sorry, at some point a man's thinking, well, it's obviously her fault we didn't get this client or we didn't get this account, because he would never be apologizing for something unless he did something that he believed he needed to apologize for. Also, we might say something like, this may be a dumb idea, or I'm not sure that this is helpful, or maybe I missed it. Things that if Albert Einstein had said, this may be a dumb idea, but E equals MC squared, we probably wouldn't be flying around the way we are.
It's almost like a setup.
Exactly.
I've been taught that that's passive communication, or I can't remember the exact term, but I used to do it myself. I was very passive and took some conflict coach training, and we were on video for our final exam doing some work, and the instructor stopped the video and said, "You're using passive language. You keep saying, I'm sorry, or I'm just, or if you don't mind, or these kinds of phrases that opened me up for that kind of response." So it's interesting.
Absolutely. And I'll give you one more, and then I'll let Al talk about some of the things that men can do.
Perfect.
And he may have something to say about what women can do as well. But another thing is taking up space. In every culture around the world, important people get space. And women very often will go into a meeting and we won't claim our fair share of space. The men will come and put their coats and things on the second chair and spread out. And when the table's full, women will squish together or offer their seat, and things that are very non-powerful. And in claiming our fair share of space and, throwing our shoulders back and appearing to be confident sends a very different message than we would if we were hunched up in a corner or in the rows behind the table instead of being active participants in a meeting.
Let me jump in and give one more thing that women can do, and then I'll say something about men.
Sure.
Women have to recognize that the workplace is simply not fair. It isn't fair because of these biases and stereotypes that we've been talking about. So that women need to be consciously aware that they've got to overcome or avoid those biases. One of the ways that they can do that is by controlling the impressions that other people have of them when they speak, when they act, when they perform. And one of the ways that women can do that is to combine the two kinds of characteristics, the communal and the agentic, so that they are able to come across as both forceful, non-passive, but also as welcoming, interested in other people's ideas, and concerned about the outcome for the group. So that women, far more than men, need to be able to combine these qualities in order to get ahead. Now, this is sometimes viewed by women as simply a lot of hooey, because they say, I'm not going to do that. I've got to be myself. I've got to be authentic. I've got to be true to who I truly am. Well, we spend a lot of time talking to women about the fact that there is no one thing that we are. We are lots of qualities, lots of characteristics, and we can draw from the characteristics that we have that will be most effective in the situation in which we're in, just like we can draw from our closet the clothes that are going to be appropriate for the activities that we're going to engage in. So impression management and the utilization of different communication techniques is critical to women's success.
And you illustrated that with your story about the training that you had, which is to combine the nice and kind and sweet with the more active communication.
And are people being taught this? I know you're doing your part in teaching this to people, but is it being taught on a more, universal level anywhere that you know of?
Not as much as it should be. We have a Change This manifesto, which is available on our website, called the Goldilocks Dilemma, which talks about sort of what women can do in training. But it is a topic that is being considered. It's just that women need to know about this before they get into the workplace. And the problem is that in school, this is really not a topic that's addressed.
Now, Al, you said you had some tips for men.
Well, I think the two tips I'll give for men. One, men need to get it. By that, I mean men need to recognize that women have a much tougher time advancing in their careers than men do. And the problem is that most men don't believe it. Most men know, they think they are absolutely unbiased. They think that their workplaces are pure meritocracies. And therefore they think that women, if they're not making it, there must be something wrong with the women. Well, the first thing we need to do is change that. We need to get men to recognize the obstacles that are put in the path of women's career advancement because of their gender and for no other reason. Once men do, in fact, get it, then they need to start mentoring women. They need to reach out to women and deal with them as peers, as equals, and they need to provide them with the assistance, the support, the training that they provide to men now. And that's not happening. So two things: men need to learn what's going on in the workplace, and then men need to reach out and be active supporters of women's advancement.
Now, I wonder how industry specific this is, just because I worked in healthcare for 25 years and taught in the college system, and now I'm a United Church of Canada minister, and those industries seem to have far more women in leadership. The CEO of the hospital, there were far more women in charge in the hospital than men when I worked there. And in the church that I work in, there are far more female ministers. So I'm wondering if it's by locale but then I do corporate training, and I've been running around to different companies here and did a whole bunch of work with cement truck companies recently. And what you're saying as far as the stereotypical attitude is very alive in the cement truck industry, apparently.
Sure.
But the other industry. So I'm just wondering if you've noticed a difference by industry.
Well, you flagged it in your career 3 careers that require communal characteristics. And so in healthcare, in education, and in ministry, those are 3 areas where there's an expectation of communal behavior. If you are a man in the healthcare industry, and if you're a male nurse, you're going to experience these issues the reverse, because the reaction is, what's a man doing here?
Yeah.
There's obviously something wrong with him, that he wants to be helpful. And so you happen to put your finger on 3 very communal types of industries. But what we found is that the studies show that this is fairly across the board.
One of the things that we do know, and I'm certainly not familiar with the say, the hospital system in Canada. But if we look across the United States at the medical schools, there are overwhelming male deans and head of medical schools as opposed to women. The senior staff at American hospitals, regardless of where it's located, specialties, are men, far more than women. Women are entering the medical profession at about the same rate as men, but they aren't in the leadership roles, at least here in the United States. So we see it not everywhere. Certainly, if you look at things like primary education in the United States, that's female dominated. Charitable work is female dominated. But the money-making, high status, high income producing areas are controlled by men and are dominated by men, and women have a tough time advancing. So what we're really talking about are areas in which money is the primary driver and indicator of success.
Right. Huh. It sounds like an overwhelming endeavor. And I want to ask you how you got into this. What? Tell us a little bit about your story. How did you come to be doing this work?
Well, when I got out of law school, I started at a tiny little law firm where they couldn't have cared if you were purple polka dotted. If you did a good job, everybody wanted you to be working for them on their projects. And then I joined a big firm, and I had a corner office and my own clients. And the reaction was, well, obviously I have to be a nasty person, because how do I have a corner office and my own clients? And I was put on our management committee and compensation committee. And what I found on the compensation committee is that the women would write self-evaluations about how I was on the ABC team, and my team consisted of John and Joe and Fred and Jason and Patrick. And we saved the client money. And one of those men, all of those men who had been on that same project, would write their self-evaluation. I solved the problem for client so-and-so and saved them $500 million. And who do you think is going to make more money? It was not the women who were writing these communal, sort of modest self-evaluations. So I started writing and speaking about what women need to do to own their accomplishments in the context of their self-evaluations and compensation. And that's how I started.
And how about you, Al?
Well, I started a law firm with 3 other fellows a long time ago, and we were convinced that we were absolutely the unbiased, that we were going to create an environment in which everyone prospered equally. And we were certain that we were different. We were special. We had the right answer. Well, that little tiny law firm grew from what was initially 6 lawyers to be about 125. And when we got to be about 100, I looked around and I said, hey, we aren't doing any better with respect to bringing women into senior leadership than anybody else is. What's wrong? We're terrific guys. We are absolutely without prejudice, without bias, and yet we're not doing any better than anybody else. And it was at that point that I decided that I needed to figure out what was going on. What was this bias? What were these unconscious, implicit stereotypes that were affecting my decisions, my partner's decisions, everyone's decisions?
And one other piece of it is that Al and I are married, and I would come home at night and I would go off on what happened during the day, and he had to lived through that with me too. So.
So you've been doing this, and one of the questions I had is about media. I have Netflix. I watch a couple of law shows, and interestingly, both of them, I watch Suits and The Good Wife, and both of them have a strong woman as the head honcho, as the boss. And I'm wondering if the media is trying to affect some change.
Absolutely. That's obviously gives them foils to work with as to the expectations and the stereotypes. The senior women in leadership roles like that, it's counter stereotypical. So it makes some people uncomfortable. So it makes those programs edgy.
But you may be aware that Glenna Davis has an institute in California on media that looks at the representation of women in media. And what they find overall is that women are not depicted as often as men. Right. There aren't as many women as men in strong roles, that in fact women's careers in media peak when they're 34, when men's continue on. Women cease to be romantic, interesting people after about 30, where men are romantically attractive into their 60s. So, sure, there are media representations of strong women, but if we look at the bigger picture, it's a small portion of the stereotypes that we're being fed every day about the difference between men and women.
Yeah, I think there's even a podcast about that. My daughter listens to it, and it takes apart films and television shows and points out that very specific thing. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but it's ruined a number of movies for her. I know that.
I'm sure it has.
So, Andie and Al, where can people find you if they want to find out more about your books and all the work that you do? Where can they find you?
Well, the easiest place is our website, which is andieandal.com. And since I spell Andie, A-N-D-I-E, that can be a little confusing to people. So it's A-N-D-I-E. ANDAL, andieandal.com. And we have information about our books. We have a newsletter. People can sign up for our newsletter. And we have information about the speaking that we do. And we also have, we post our blogs there. So we have, that's a good place to start. Great. And if anybody wants to reach out to us, they go to our website. They can reach out to us there, and we're happy to respond immediately.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask you for one last piece of advice for somebody who's living through some stereotypical activity at work. What's the last piece of advice you can give for somebody?
Don't take it personally, because when we take it personally and we think that it's about us, then it's much harder to feel resilient and overcome it. And the reality is it's not about you. It's really about the workplace.
And I guess my advice would be to men, don't let the Me Too movement scare you off. Just because there are reports of harassment, because there are reports of women's greater sensitivity, don't withdraw. Don't cease to be a mentor to women. Don't cease to be engaged with the advancement of women.
Be an ally,
not a adversary. We cannot let the concern about our own reputation scare us away. That isn't to suggest that I'm saying there isn't bad stuff going on, but it is to say that for all of those good men that are out there, don't withdraw. Stay engaged.
Beautiful. Thank you both for taking the time to be on Careers by Jen today. I've really appreciated this conversation.
Well, thank you. We've enjoyed talking with you, Jen.
It's very nice of you to have us, and we've enjoyed it.
Take care. You've been listening to Careers by Jen with Jen Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. You know, if every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.